For now, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Pierre Pyun, Vice President, Government Affairs for Bombardier, who I'd like to remind you is our event sponsor today. Pierre leads government relations activities in Canada for Bombardier Inc., Bombardier Aerospace, and Bombardier Transportation. Prior to this, Pierre worked at Canadian diplomatic posts in China and was a senior trade commissioner at the Canadian Embassy in Beijing. He serves on the board of directors of a number of associations, including the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, Aerospace Industries Association of Canada, the Canada-China Business Council, and the Canada-India Business Council. I would like to invite Pierre up here. Pierre, are you ready for your time at the podium? Let's put our hands together for Pierre. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Heather. Merci. Alors, ça me fait plaisir. Merci pour l'opportunité de pouvoir dire quelques commentaires avant l'allocution de M. Hyder. Je pense qu'il va sans dire que le moment est très opportun pour un discours, une allocution sur la position concurrentielle du Canada avec un gouvernement qui a un nouveau mandat. I think the timing is really excellent for a talk with Goldy on the competitive position of Canada. We have a government with a new mandate. I don't think we should be deterred by the fact that it's a minority government. I think history has shown that minority governments are also able to produce very ambitious and bold and visionary agendas and actions. And I think what we're going to hear from Goldy later on, Mr. Hyder, it's going to be a call for action because I think we're facing challenges, major challenges, whether it's climate change, the productivity challenge, the aging of the population, the rise of protectionism, economic nationalism, the transformation brought about by cutting-edge, very advanced technologies, including digital technologies, and really the world order as well, sort of shifting before our eyes with major fault lines like the US-China relations that have global impact and impact on Canadian interests. So we do live in uncertain times. Canada needs to act collectively in order to preserve Canada's position as a destination for global investment and also as a location, as a base for Canadian firms and firms from abroad to do business from Canada globally. And I think these issues really resonate with the membership of the Business Council of Canada, resonate with us, Bombardier, as well. We're very export-oriented. We derive more than 90% of our revenues from external markets, yet from a very strong base here in Canada, where we employ around 20,000 people. And in many ways, I mean, this footprint is sort of outsized relative to the size of the Canadian market. But we are punching above our weight in many different ways, and I think the same can be said for many industry sectors in Canada. I think you'll hear from Mr. Hyder as well on the commitment that the Business Council and its membership, commitments that we're making, because it's really a collective action that is required, including commitments to invest in youth and the next generation of business leaders, innovators, and entrepreneurs. We're striving to walk the talk. I think I'd be remiss not to mention our own action at Bombardier. About a month ago, we announced an internship program creating more than 1,000 internship positions within Bombardier. It's a $17 million investment for us for the 2019-2020 school year. And we want to promote diversity through this initiative as well. So we expect 40% of the positions to be filled by women, with a focus on increasing women representation in fields like engineering and science. In the same vein, I think you mentioned the presence of students here. I'd like to acknowledge as well the presence of interns from the parliamentary internship program. We have I think the fortune to have one of the interns with us who spent some time with us during the election campaign. We've been a long-standing sponsor of the program. And not only the program is a way to support the democratic process, but I think, again, investing in the youth interested in public policy. The last comment I would make, Heather, is that the organization that Mr. Hyder ably leads not only represents the business leaders of 150 companies, but they represent as well ecosystems that those companies either anchor, drive, or are part of. And those ecosystems include hundreds of suppliers and hundreds of small and medium-sized enterprises. So it's not about governments versus businesses or large companies versus smaller companies. I think we all have a role to play. We're all part of a whole, and we need to pull in the same direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre, on behalf of Bombardier for sponsoring the event. We really appreciate your support. Well, it is my pleasure to welcome our fabulous guest speaker today, Goldy Hyder. It's really hard to do this because Goldy comes with a book of accolades, so I'm going to do my best to condense his accomplishments and achievements and try to get you to him as soon as possible. Yeah, he's going like this. As many of you know, Goldy was appointed the President and CEO of the Business Council of Canada a year ago this month, so he's been there for a year. The council was founded in 1976 as a non-profit, non-partisan organization, that's critical, representing the chief executives and heads of 150 Canadian businesses, which employ 1.7 million Canadians, spanning every major industry across the country. Prior to this, Mr. Hyder was president and CEO of Hill and Knowlton Strategies, who have a table here today. Where's Hill and Knowlton? Are you here? There they are, right behind him. How handy is that? In 2001, Mr. Hyder served as a director of policy and the chief of staff to the Right Honorable Joe Clark, a statesman. In addition to his achievements in business and public policy, Mr. Hyder has a long track record of service on behalf of several charities and nonprofit organizations. He is a past co-chair of the United Way of Ottawa's campaign cabinet and a former member of the Board of Governors at Carleton University. He currently serves as a chair of the Ottawa Senators Foundation, vice chair of the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada's Asia Business Leaders Advisory Council, and he's an executive committee member of the Century Initiative. Goldy also has, he's made several media appearances. He's an excellent speaker. I would argue probably one of the best speakers that I've heard since my time in Ottawa. He is now hosting a podcast, if you didn't know, Speaking of Business, which features interviews with Canadian innovators, entrepreneurs, and business leaders. So I think every one of these episodes is a masterclass that we can all tap into and learn something from. More recently, not more recently, in 2013, he received the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal in recognition of his contributions to Canada. He holds a Master of Arts in Public Policy from the University of Calgary. And best of all, Goldy Hyder is a former president of the Canadian Club of Ottawa, and he's wearing his past president's pin today. It's such a pleasure having him as our guest speaker, and the timing couldn't be better. As we all know, and I said earlier, we have a new parliament that's going to be sitting very shortly. It's led by a Liberal minority government, and we currently have new MPs that are going through orientation as we speak. The economy is always a pressing topic, which makes today's discussion very timely. Earlier this year, the Business Council of Canada launched a task force on Canada's economic future. And I know personally from the people behind it that they are some of the greatest minds in the business community in Canada. We're here to learn more about it, so without any further ado, I would like to introduce you all to Mr. Goldy Hyder.
Bonjour, mes amis. I'm going to spare you the rest of my Alberta French. I hope you don't mind. First of all, I am so humbled to be here. Honestly, I choked up because, as Heather referenced, I've been a member of the Canadian Club of Ottawa going way back to 2003 when I first joined and had a chance to be president. And never did I think that I would, let alone be a speaker, that people would come if I was the speaker. And so I am extremely humbled by all of your presence, and on the distinguished guests that were noted earlier. I also probably should thank the Bank of Canada for aligning their remarks this morning to not have to make me rewrite the speech that I'm about to give. So thank you for that, Carolyn and others. It shouldn't surprise you that I feel very much at home here. Ottawa's been home for me for 20 years now, for my family. And I want to have some straight talk with you today. You know, we're a country that lives our life looking at the glass half full, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there is a half glass empty version as well. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that today. Now, those of you who know me know that I love Canada. It's true that there's probably no greater country in the world in which to live. But I'm worried about our future. I'm very worried, in fact, about our future. And the case in point, if you look at the last federal election, I submit to you Exhibit A. On election night, it was as if Oprah was giving away cars to everybody. Everybody wins. Everybody won. Every political leader claimed victory that night. But let me tell you who lost. Who lost are Canadians. It was a lost opportunity to engage with the people of Canada who are not immune, who are not unique, who are experiencing the same things that people are facing around the world. It's not like we're cocooned from what's taking place around the world. And yet, we spend our time talking about what I describe as small ball. You know, little things, largely about redistributing wealth, wealth that we need to create in order to redistribute. We got camping trips and, you know, free museum passes and other things. Wonderful, I suppose. But the reality is we dodged and failed to have an opportunity to discuss how do we actually grow our economy. Because if there's one thing I am sure about, is the solutions to the pain that people feel and the anxieties that they feel, and why is my 30-year-old living in my basement still? What do I got to do to compete in this world? It's not going to come from running more deficits and increasing debt. It's not going to come from printing more money. I know of no other way to help us find a way forward than to grow our economy. And unfortunately, the failure for that to happen has resulted in the outcome that you see now on these charts. We are a nation divided, and we should be worried about that. Again, we're not immune from what's been taking place around the world. Now, one of the challenges of being Canadian, of course, is we've had it pretty good. For 75 years, the United Kingdom had our back. For 75 years, the Americans have had our back, give or take a year or two. So good enough was largely good enough. We were doing just fine. But that, I submit to you today, is no longer the case, and it cannot be the case. As a former member of the Business Council said to me, who's a real public policy scholar in his own right, it was Ed Clark at TD, said, good enough is no longer good enough. And we need to make sure that we understand that. And the reason is the world is changing. The world is changing all around us, and it's much more competitive. I just had the distinct honor and pleasure of being a part of Canada's official UN delegation in New York for UN Week in September, accompanying people like Mr. Chrétien, Mr. Clark, and Mr. Charest, and others. And it was stunning to me what I saw from the countries we met, who are, in most cases, were Caribbean countries or African countries. They all came with their data on what they are doing to make themselves competitive. Countries, in some cases, I confess, I had to look up on a map, were telling me about their ease of doing business ranking and how it went from 186th in the world to 164th in the world, and they were proud to share that with us. And so the world is changing. It's fast-paced, the digital age, mobility of talent and capital. Don't kid yourself. People and money have more options in the world than they've ever had before, and there's an ease of mobility. And we're witnessing it with the eventual shift of power, economic power certainly, to Asia. And that's all happening around us. So for those of you who watch Colbert, which I like to do to relax in the evening, meanwhile, in Canada, our ease of doing business has dropped from being fourth in the world in 2006 to being, if I'd given this speech last week, we were 22nd in the world. But unfortunately, I'm giving it this week, and on this weekend, the new rankings were released, and we dropped to 23rd. Now, it's entirely possible that we've done nothing different than what got us to be number 4. But what it suggests to you that other countries are accelerating their growth strategies, that they're doing things because in their cases, good enough is not something they've ever experienced. But they see opportunity to accelerate their economic growth. Our demographics, we know what's happening. About a decade from now, we're going to face a very severe demographic crunch. Everybody talks about, debt to GDP ratios and all of that, but last time I checked, there's only one taxpayer, and so we really should accumulate the deficits and the debts from our federal government, our provincial governments, and our municipal governments. And what you will find is we have a very bad record when it comes to accumulating deficits and debts. And it might be fine as we're in a low interest rate environment, but I'm not an economist, but I know enough to know these things are cyclical. Someday, they're going to go up. And if we don't do something about it when we can, we're going to experience 1993 all over again. And then you're going to get really angry people. We know what's going on trade. It is literally being, multilateralism and globalization is literally on trial. I mean, just this morning, I thought it was fake news when it was shared with me that Chile canceled hosting the APEC and COP. Now, I understand their rationale for doing it, but it just goes to show you the rapidly changing environment all around us. And again, meanwhile, we have put 75% of our eggs in one basket. It's all trade with the United States. And it's something that we, those of us who've immigrated here, are equally guilty of. You come here and you say, well, I'm just going to do as the Romans do. I'm going to do business with the US. And we have not taken full advantage of the diasporas that are here in our country. And governments, to their credit, blue stripe, red stripe, have put in place the policies. Trade diversification is real. The policies are in place. And as my friend Jim Carr likes to say, we built the bridge. It's our job to walk across it. So we need to pay attention to that. We can't get our resources to market. I have an entirely different speech on that one if you want to hear it as an Albertan. And believe me, you want to talk about emotion, that's when I really get going. But it's absurd that we can't get our resources to market in a country like Canada, where we are blessed with resources that are not just about oil and gas. We need to change that frame. It is a national natural resources strategy that we need from one province to the other, and start talking about how to get our resources to market. Because if you want to have influence in the world, part of it will be the fact that you have things that people want. And believe me, there's a lot of demand for our products around the world. So unfortunately, our reputation is becoming one of a place that can't get things done. We don't build things anymore. And that's a real problem. I've often said if the goal was to build a national highway or the national railway system today, it would not get done. It would not get done. But don't just take my word for it. Let me quote the government's own Growth Council, in which it warned that short of action, we're going to experience slow growth and stagnation for years to come. Minister Morneau, in 2015, as finance minister, said at the Toronto Board of Trade, Canada's economy was facing, and I quote, considerable headwinds, 2015. He talked about our rapidly aging population, our levels of increasing household debt, and above all, the need to promote long-term economic growth. And yet, sadly, our election addressed none of that. So why should we care? Because again, it's good enough. I don't talk to regular Canadians and get through all the data that I did with you, I focus on values. What do we cherish? What do we care about? And when you ask Canadians what they care about, one of the things that comes back at you is, we're damn proud to be Canadian. And yet, I think we're failing to understand that policy choices that we make or don't make actually determines the thinness or the thickness of our border. So it's Washington can make your foreign policy, Washington can make your energy policy, Washington can make, you can't let that happen. We have to have independence in our country to make policy decisions so that our sovereignty is not at stake. We are Canadian, proud of it, and there's a very thick border to define that so that everybody understands we're not the same as anybody else. We're proud to be Canadian. So our sovereignty is eroding, literally, as we eat here, and we have to be mindful of that. The other thing that defines us as Canadians is our social programs. We are a country of caring societies. Well, even our equalization formulas is about sharing and caring for each other. But our social programs are at risk. I haven't seen an election in the last 3 or 4 elections now where anybody talked about the future of health care. It's like a dirty word. We don't talk about health care. And yet I think Canadians are more than ready to talk about health care. We know that our social programs are underfunded. Right? But again, I ask you, what is the way in which we can invest in our social programs? Because I don't know of a special bank account that was set up when Canada was formed, said this is just for your social programs, you have unlimited supply of capital to use for this. We don't have such a thing. So we must have a plan. We must have a plan to grow our economy if we're going to have the ability to be sovereign, if we're going to have the ability to invest in our social programs. And more, and probably just as importantly, the other value that Canadians really take pride in is we're a country that is punching above our weight globally and has for a long period of time. Some of it is because of geography, but some of it is also because of who we are. And that's also at risk. When I was at a meeting this week listening to Mr. Mulroney and 4 former foreign affairs ministers, they were talking about, where's our investments in international aid? Where are we in the military? What are we doing to meet our obligations to NATO and so forth? Again, all very, very important questions, but the only way to do that is to grow our economy. Now, it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. We can actually shape our own destiny through action. And that's why we at the Business Council set out to provide leadership. Not alone. Let me emphasize this. This is not some tablets from the C-suite in the 60th floor of Bay and King. That is not what we are doing here. We set out to provide this leadership. And we also set out to recognize that it's so easy to blame our politics. It's so easy to just say it's somebody else's fault. But that's not fair. We, as Canadians, need to look in the mirror as well. Many of us who are actually influential in public policy and advocacy need to be asking ourselves, what are we doing to advance this? The UN recently ranked us as in the World Happiness Report as amongst the happiest people on earth. But the problem with happiness is it breeds complacency. It's that old saying, Canada was born on third and thinks it hit a triple. And baseball's on my mind because, of course, the Washington Expos are playing tonight in Game 7, so go Washington. Go Expos. But complacency has become to Canada what confidence is to America. We've taken our place in the world for granted, and we need to change our culture. We cannot allow, as Pierre referenced and Heather referenced, ourselves to be divided along the old fault lines, big business versus labor, big business versus small business, rich versus poor, one class of society versus another class of society, east versus west. This is a time for unity. This is a time for all of us to come together and put the country and our citizens and the kids and the grandkids who are coming after us before all of that noise. One of the first things I did when I went to the Business Council is reach out to labor movements. And my friend, I don't know if Hassan made it or not, but my friend Hassan Youssef of the Canadian Labour Congress is a great example. He said, I can't even be seen with you, so we better do this meeting in your office. And we met. and we sat down, and I said, here's what I want to do, Hassan. I want to write down on one side of a ledger all the things that labor and business can agree on, and I want to write on the other side of the ledger things that you think we disagree about, and we might, but let's draw that up. It was a very long list of things we agree on, and a very short list of things we disagree on. I said to him, I said, is it right for your kids and my kids that we can't find a way to work together on the things that we work on? So let's do that. We're trying to charge that course forward, but I think we all have to look at ourselves and say, what are your moments in which we can reach across the aisle and work with people who apparently are not the ones we're supposed to be working with? The other thing about our culture is we rip down the successful. I don't have time for a joke, but Kellen Rovinescu told me a good one about that once. I can tell you later. But we rip down our successful. We resent those who achieve in this country, including those who have achieved by overcoming all kinds of adversity. Second plug for my podcast, Heather, thank you for that. But listen to the stories of some of my members whom we want to rip apart. One of them came and escaped violence in the back of a trunk, pregnant at 15. Another one came as a refugee, 4 or 5 years old, never spoke a word of English or French. These are people who aspired and achieved great success. We should be celebrating their success, not ripping it down. And we cannot ourselves settle on scale. This is another great big problem that we have in Canada, is we don't scale up very well. You know, the grand ambition is to start a company, build it if you're lucky to 10 million, sell, buy a cottage in Muskoka, and watch the Leafs. Not here. But that's not how we're going to be able to compete as we go forward. And so I'm going to suggest to you that one of the reasons we all felt so let down by the last federal election campaign was that no one was really offering us a sense of national purpose and the determination to make that happen. Now I'm going to go even further and make a bold prediction, which you're going to hold me to account for. But I predict that the next party to win a majority government in this country, in Ottawa, will do so because it demonstrates an understanding of the scale of the challenges facing Canada's economy, and it will be rewarded by voters for being honest with them and actually laying forward a plan of how we're going to move our country forward. It cannot be a plan just to spend money. It actually needs to promote sustainable, long-term economic growth, because it's our obligation, whether you're in government or not, to build a better future for the country and for all Canadians. And just read the Bank of Canada's report today. It's got us slowing down. Now, we can feel good about being at 1.5 because somebody else is at 0.9, but that's not growth. That's like rounding errors. We need to really accelerate the growth of our economy if we're going to have any chance to preserve this country in the way in which we want it to be. And of all the places I can give this speech, and of all the places that understands the importance of a plan, it's here, in this ballroom, at the Canadian Club of Ottawa, because this is where Sir Wilfrid Laurier made his infamous remarks, which almost every speaker I've ever heard the Canadian Club refers to, where he said the 20th century belongs to Canada. But it didn't. It didn't because the slogan wasn't good enough. We needed the actual plan. We didn't have one. And so let's not repeat the mistakes of history. We are offering a plan today. It's the result of an 8-month process of research and consultation by our task force on Canada's economic future. Now, I want you to know that I've worked in this job and in previous positions with large Canadian companies and Canadian business leaders for many, many years. And I can tell you this was a very unique initiative. We launched the task force last February with 3 of our members, CEOs, to lead the way. Louis Vachon at National Bank, Nicole Verkint at OMX, and Chuck Magro of Nutrien, leader of a global fertilizer company. And we said right from the beginning that before our members even talked about the final product of what the task force report might look like, they spoke about what they definitely didn't want it to be. They were adamant that it shouldn't be just a laundry list of self-serving recommendations to benefit business. Instead, the focus should be on what is good for Canada as a whole. It shouldn't try to boil the ocean, and it shouldn't ask of the government to do things that are unreasonable, that you wouldn't do if you were like I often say, I'd like the GST to be 10%, but I don't go door to door advocating for that policy. Right? We have to make sure that our asks are doable for our government. And equally important, we felt very strongly about consultation with the general public, but starting out with those people like you in this room and others who really understand how public policy gets made. And so it could not have been done in an echo chamber. And so we decided at the very outset that we would solicit and welcome input from Canadians. Our website, www.itsaboutcanada.ca. We've heard from tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Canadians with their own ideas, and I was expecting all kinds of vitriol there. It turns out it's not Twitter. It's actually people who took the time to think about what it is that they're thinking about and what they want us to be able to do about it. And we heard from, sure, other business organizations, but we also heard from labor. We heard from Indigenous groups. We heard from social policy experts. We heard from urban planners. We heard from environmental groups, and many, many other sources of advice. We're doing what I used to say in my last job, trying to build a parade. Build a parade of like-minded Canadians. We don't have to agree on everything, but we need to at least agree that there's a country that needs our help, and we should plan and map out a strategy of how to do that. And based on all of that input, we identified a small number of specific, what we consider practical and achievable things that Canada's new government can do to accelerate the pace of economic growth and ensure a better quality of life and standard of living for all. And here is the result. Right? We're calling it a better future for Canadians, because that is our focus. I encourage you to read it and consider whether the ideas we're putting on the table make sense. Now, I'm not going to go through each policy recommendation so you can all breathe a sigh of relief. There's 6 of them, just 6 of them, in just 6 areas. I just want you to hear what the areas are. Skills and talent. When I speak to my members, number 1 or number 2 answer to the question, what's keeping you up at night, is usually skills and talent, labor. 2, energy, environment, and infrastructure. Deliberately lumped together because we have to figure it out. We've got to figure it out. We're an organization, as a business organization, that was the very first in North America over a decade ago to endorse carbon pricing. We're already on board with the environmental agenda. We got lots of people talking about that, but we better figure out how to make sure that we're building the infrastructure for our resources right across this country. The importance of innovation and new economy. We can't just be looking at what we have. We have to look at where the puck is going, and we have to make sure that we can support them. And the 2 that I know you're all waiting for here, taxes and regulations. And a lot of people say, oh, there's nothing new here. There they go again, taxes and regulations. Well, just like a cake has certain ingredients that you need to bake it, turns out it's the same thing for an economy. So the reason you keep hearing businesses, large and small, saying the same things is we haven't addressed those issues. We're losing our tax competitiveness and our regulatory competitiveness to other countries. And last but not least is Canada's place in the world, something that Canadians really cherish. And we've got to make sure that we're understanding what is going on out there, because it's not what went on in the last 150 years we've been around. We've got to figure out our place in the world with a sensible, smart, strategic, shrewd foreign policy, really a global strategy. We need a global strategy. And so, as I said, just one proposal in each one of those. And I can assure you that what you're going to read is not a radical blueprint, sent to me from Wall Street. That's not what this is about. On the contrary, I hope that what you'll see is our recommendations are actually in the true traditions of Canadian public policy. We're a country that does incremental things. We don't take big leaps. There are anomalies in our history where we have, but overall, we kind of inch our way along. And so while we can't exactly inch our way along, but maybe we can take like 6 inches at a time. But some of the things we're talking about here are not at all radical. It's moderate, inclusive, and nonpartisan. There's nothing partisan about the document. But I will say what is possible. Listening to that advice, consulting with us and all of you with that advice, will allow a plan to emerge that will allow the country's trajectory to go forward. Now, before I wrap, there's one more thing I want to mention to you. You probably said, you know what, I expected to hear all of that from the leader of the Business Council of Canada. That's what they talk about. But there's one more thing. And that is, we in the business community have looked in the mirror and said, what are we doing? What are we doing for Canada? What are we doing for Canadians? And so we recognize that business has to step up too, and we are, with tangible recommendations and actions that we're actually taking. We're putting forward 6 recommendations for businesses beyond the Business Council. So we're doing it, we're making these commitments, but we're encouraging others to take a look at what we're talking about here and do the same thing. This is what it includes. No particular order, but 6 items. We're looking for opportunities to improve labor force participation amongst Indigenous people. That's not because it's topical. They have a demographic that's completely different than the rest of the country. It's good for them, it's good for business, it's good for the country. We have to stop making false choices. If I win, you need to lose. It can be a win-win-win for all of us. We need to fully embrace diversity and inclusion in the workplace. And there's a number of measures that we can do to do that. And it's beyond gender. We have immigrants who are not being fully utilized. We have people with disabilities not being fully utilized in the workforce. We have Indigenous communities not being fully. We need to do a better job of making sure that people are getting a chance. All of you know about Bell and Let's Talk, the mental health program. Why is it just Bell? We should all be looking at our mental health programs. And George Cope at Bell will be happy to share with you the data as to what an impact mental health programs have had on productivity, on health, on insurance, on all kinds of things, and on the economy writ large. And so we are committing, as the Business Council, to make sure all of our members are looking at putting in place mental health programs for our fellow Canadians. We're going to invest in learning and development, because one of the great stresses out there right now, as I said, is why is my 30-year-old at home? Well, we've got to make sure they got the right skills. We have to make sure that they're being prepared for the world that is going to be, not the world that was. And none of these things I'm mentioning to you today, in terms of what we're going to do, require government. Government's welcome to be a partner and is a partner in some of these things, but we're not waiting for government to give us a mandate or a regulatory regime around these things, and please don't do that. We're just going to do these things. We're just going to do these things ourselves and hold us to account for that. We have to expand career opportunities, as I said, for young Canadians. And then finally, we need to do a better job of supporting our innovators and our entrepreneurs. And that means providing them mentorship, but it also means sometimes making that little more expensive purchase from a Canadian startup than maybe going out and getting it from somewhere else in the world. Give our own businesses a chance to grow and to scale. And that falls on us to do that, and we've accepted that responsibility. And so we do so because we believe that business investing in people is a responsibility that we have and that we take seriously. It does, however, also depend on our political friends making sound policy choices. And so I don't want to diminish the importance or pick a side, one 6 or the other 6. They're both important. We need our governments to act and build the framework, the regulatory framework and the policy framework. At the same time, businesses need to do a better job ensuring that we're there for Canadians as we deal with adversity and anxieties. And so our goal is to work together. Our goal is to work together with you, with governments, and others, because here's the thing. We are the first group of people in the history of this country who are not on track to provide our children and our grandchildren a better standard of living and a quality of life. And that should sicken us. We owe it to them. We're looking forward to working with you, and I thank you for being here today.
I just want to say one thing I love about the future of Canadians in your report is that for any of you in here who are runners, when you're running, you have to keep your sight line on the horizon. You're always looking towards where you're going.
And a good pace.
And a good pace, or you trip over your feet. And I think, as someone who's not an economist or a business expert, what I have seen and observed is a whole lot of short-termism. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about what you have to say. I'm going to start off with a question from William Stewart. His writing is very legible. That's why I'm choosing his. In a single-minded focus on is a single-minded focus on competitiveness sufficient to meet the challenges of the modern world? I have been hearing this message for 35 years, but it seems to me an adversarial message. It pits country against country, individual against individual. It heightens competitions, creating losers. And they vote populist around the world. We only have one planet. In a time AI will put even more people out of work. Don't we need a policy of cooperation more than we need competition?
Wow, lot there to unpack. Let me start with the AI piece. I want you to go look up a thing called the automation paradox. What the automation paradox is a reminder that in history, every time we've made progress with technology, we've actually created net new more jobs. That's what happens. So for all the people who are panicked about what's taking place, you know, one of my friends likes to use the anecdote about, remember all the elevators that used to have a person that, you know, kind of like had to close the gate and turn the key and press the button and ride up with you? And, you know, one day the elevators worked themselves. Those people were reskilled and retrained to become elevator repair people or escalator repair people. We have got to do a better job in transitioning on that. With respect to the environment, as I said, you know, these are not mutually exclusive things. We've taken a responsibility. When it was an unpopular thing to do, businesses endorsed carbon pricing. We think that Canadians do a better job with the environment than, frankly, many of the other places in the world where we rely on our natural resources. It's absurd to me that we have the energy that we do in Canada, and yet we are not letting it be shipped to our own, you know, cousins in the Maritimes. And they're buying it from, you know, the poster children for the environment in some of the other countries and human rights. You can look it up. You know, we do a better job of that, and we have to make sure that, you know, we get that message out. Now, going backwards, in terms of competitiveness, you know, look, countries are a special thing, so I do not in any way want to diminish it by comparing it to a business. But the reality is countries compete. We are competing. Everywhere I go, there is a hunger for others to say, what can we do to attract your capital, and what can we do to attract your talent? And there's an old saying in politics that applies just as much to business. Money follows message. You know, we're conflicted. We've got our pension funds out there saying, go out there and get me the best return. You know, we've got our stocks in our Canadian companies or others saying, go out there and get me the best return. Believe you and me, our companies would rather be doing more investments in Canada, but they do have you as a shareholder to be accountable to. And so if it's easier to set up business in Ireland or Australia or somewhere else, they go. Because capital is mobile and talent is mobile. So there is a competition. And we at best realize that if we don't compete, we're losing Canada. Everything that it means to be Canadian is at risk if we can't compete.
Moving on to what you had mentioned with healthcare, and there were not a whole lot of substantive policy issues mentioned in this last election campaign. And the far north, which will be coming increasingly into play with climate change. We have a question from Vanessa. The Health Act commits healthcare entitlement unfettered by geography or finances, yet this is in fact a huge issue for most Canadians in remote northern areas of this great country. We have had flights in place to airlift people at no cost, but hope is not a method. Where does reinvention of the healthcare at an accelerated pace fit? So where does healthcare fit in your vision of the future, I guess she's asking.
Well, part of being competitive, of course, means what kind of an environment are you providing people that you're trying to attract here or maintain here? And all of those social programs that I referenced earlier, for us, it's about how do you fund them? Because we're not able to sustain them and fund them, so governments say, you know, I'm just going to give an escalator and I'm going to walk away from the health issue because as long as the provinces get a little bit of money, they'll be good with it. You know, when Stephen Harper cut the GST, one of the thoughts that people had is, well, why don't the provinces pick up that 2%? We're all used to paying it anyways. Why didn't the provinces pick that up and start making it dedicated funding towards healthcare and so forth? So we don't get into to every single public policy issue for the reason that I stated. It's not about boiling the ocean. We elect people to do these things. What we're saying is on these core issues that allow you to have an economy that's growing, that allows you to fund your programs, if we're not getting the talent and if we're not getting the investments, we're going to have a problem. And we're very lucky, and I should say a shout out to this last election because there's not a lot of positive things said about it. I'm proud as a Canadian that our major political parties listened to a call that we had made to them earlier in the year that said, please do not make immigration a hot-button political issue in this campaign. And thankfully, it could have been, don't kid yourself, it could have been, it wasn't. And so I have hope that, even if it's insufficient, that our people are capable of making the right decisions. What we need to do as Canadians is encourage them and support them. And with respect to the media, we've got to get away from the small ball reporting as well. Like, we've got big issues to deal with here. We've got very big issues to deal with here, and we need to support and encourage those who seek public office to have the courage to move with that public policy agenda, because they come from a good place. They want to do these things, but if they don't hear it back from us, and they don't read about it, and it's the gotcha moment of the day, then you get what you get. I've had many members of Parliament say to me, I cannot make this up. I have no idea why you come and see us. I don't know why you come and meet with us. You need to go convince Canadians that whatever it is that you want is important to them, and then I'll do whatever you want. And so, as sad as that is, because we believe we elect them to be leaders, social media has made them followers. And we want to acknowledge that what they do is hard. So it's up to us to help them deal with some of these big public policy issues as we go forward.
Well, I think to be fair, a lot of incoming MPs actually don't have a firm grasp of policy issues, a lot of them. They've come in for all the right reasons, and they do seek guidance, which is why I think this discussion is very timely today, because you've created 6 very simple action steps for people to take, and it's digestible and understandable, and I hope that that goes a long way in providing a how-to for parliamentarians.
Can I just say one other thing that I think is really important, especially in Ottawa? We never appreciate our public service enough. The wisdom that our public servants carry is globally valued and cherished. I was just in the UK, and they haven't had a trade deal in 40 years. They haven't had a trade deal in 40 years. Guess who they called? Can you send Canadian negotiators to give us a hand, by the way, to negotiate back with us one day? But we have a standing, and so we should really do a better job of making sure that our public servants are respected and regarded, and we're communicating with them. Because one of the things I did when I was asked to speak with at the summer retreat of deputy ministers and assistant deputy ministers and others was I laid out pretty much the same stuff I did here, but I said, you know what, if you say something different and I say something different, they're not going to listen to either one of us. But if you say the same thing and I say the same thing and we bring others to the table that are saying the same thing, funny how quickly a podium and a microphone shows up, because it's become a popular thing to do. So we need to make it popular and cool to deal with our economic stagnation and to build a plan. I don't know how we do that. I'm starting with what I've discussed with you today, but it's up to us as part of my message as well. It's not just up to government.
It's interesting what you say about the institution of government and bureaucracy, is that it's no secret that Canadians have said they don't trust government, and certainly as a former journalist and someone who runs a political bureau, they say they don't trust journalists. But the reality is, when we do surveys on whether or not people trust the government to handle their personal data, all of a sudden it's an 83 to 86% uptake. So to your point, people do have faith in the government. We just have to message it. As you were saying, message it clearly.
Well, the good news is, I'm sorry to the H&K folks, but the Edelman Trust Barometer globally has shown that businesses and business leaders are seeing more and more rise in the level of trust that society has in them. And I think the reason, ironically, is the thing that killed political leadership, social media, has actually enabled corporate leadership. Our corporate leaders are out there now. They're engaging with their employees, their customers, their stakeholders, their regulators, their governments, their media, and others. And that's going a long ways, because one of the things that people are realizing is, you know what? This is important, that the voices of business leaders to get out there and talk about the country is actually a very important thing. And so that's what you're seeing. I invite you again to visit our website and just look at who's out there talking about what issues. And they're not often self-serving. You know, I mean, the announcement that Pierre made about Bombardier today and others, that can be replicated by so many of our members, and is being so, because they feel like, well, if I don't do it, who will? And that's one of my messages to you. If we don't do the things we're talking about, who exactly are we waiting for to do it?
So the overarching message of that is unity, and it brings me to the next question, energy and pipelines. Where, and as an Albertan, Frank from Scotiabank has asked, how do we balance environmental priorities with growth in the business agenda as we go forward? i.e. pipelines, electrical power, etc.?
So this is a difficult question to answer because I think some of the blame actually resides with us in the business community. And I've said this to my members. I said, you know, we were late. We were late to the game to realize this thing called social license. We were late to see what was going on right before our eyes with the essential, I'm sorry, this is a provocative word, but essentially the hijacking of the agenda where it became all one-sided all the time. And then historically, we're not very good communicators. We haven't been very good at telling our stories. You know, we're running our businesses, you know, making sure we're, you know, returning, you know, the growth that is expected of us. And now that we're coming out there to tell our story, we have to punch through all that noise. There's so much noise out there. The demand for oil is like this for the next 30 years in the OECD. You can deny that if you like. That's the demand. Right? And so the question is, are they going to buy our energy, or are they going to buy it from some of the other OPEC countries? And I would prefer that they buy ours, and you should too if you care about the environment. And if you care about, you know, human rights and other things. We have a great record as Canadians. We're more well-regarded abroad for our ability to do these things than we are internally in our own country. And there's a lot of mischief-making going on this issue. And I can tell you that you know, we can do responsible reconciliation of the economy and the environment. And even on the Indigenous question, let me remind you, there's a reason it's First Nations. They are not all, the way we're being led to believe, opposed to, you know, infrastructure development. That's hardly the case if you considered Gateway and what was going on with East and other projects, the LNG and others. Group after group is starting to say, not only do I think it's the right thing, I want equity in that project. I want to be a part of that project because I think I can reconcile, and there should be no doubt how much Indigenous communities care about the environment, with the reality that if we don't do it, someone else is going to do it, and I'd rather have it be us. So these are tough messages to deliver because you have to punch through all that noise and all those headlines. And this is where my call out to the media is we owe Canadians, you know, more honesty and more truth and better reporting on both sides of issues, not just one side of an issue.
I love the message of inclusivity in that, because that's what Canada is. We're just going to take 2 more questions, because I'm very aware of the fact that you're all pressed for time. We do have more than 2 questions here. So again, Goldy, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask that if there's a way that we could transcribe these and send them to you and have someone, either you or someone in your office, answer them.
By all means.
We'll put them on our website. Okay.
Happy to.
So this one is from Kay Lindsay at FPAC. What are your thoughts on increasing protected areas while addressing natural resource industry competitiveness and challenges?
Yeah, so there, again, we put forward the notion of actually having a national conversation about our ability to move our resources. As I said at the outset, we need to reframe the debate about being oil and gas. The Ring of Fire is Ontario's oil sands. You know, the mining capacity, the minerals that are up there. And yet, we can't seem to even build a road to get there to do these things. Hydro in Quebec is their greatest natural resource, and they want to be able to share it and you know, not just the eastern United States, but the rest of the country. We should find a way to let them do that. Nuclear is an industry that has, you know, if you're really about the environment, then you can't dodge the fact that nuclear is the cleanest way of doing that, and half of Ontario is, as you know, powered by nuclear. We have our fisheries. We have our agriculture. We have our, you know, natural resources literally from one end of the country to the other. And so we need leadership. We need our Prime Minister and our premiers to sit down and say, what do we do, respecting the environment, respecting the protected areas, respecting the rights of people along the way. And I will tell you, my experience is, there is nobody who wants to make sure that a project is ethical and works and doesn't have a disaster than the CEO responsible for that project. Because if you get it wrong, you know, you get pummeled in the stock market. You know, a leak is a disaster when it happens. It's a crisis. Everybody goes out of their way to make sure that our projects are viable and sustainable. And so I think if we're able to have honest conversations as Canadians, recognizing that there isn't consensus, that there is going to be points of disagreement, that's where I call on our political leaders to lead. And again, to the credit of this government, purchasing TMX was not a popular move. Right? Now, my ask is, can you build it? Because that's the best way to send a signal to international markets that Canada is a place where you can actually get stuff done.
You earlier talked about a crisis in confidence compared to, say, the States. And it's kind of a David and Goliath story that we're all familiar with, which is why we all apologize for everything. I would argue that in the David and Goliath model, that Canada actually has a competitive advantage in our size and everything you've spoken about with our natural resources. We have various sectors sprinkled across the country. We have various groups with interest. So overcoming that crisis of leadership, it sounds to me what you're saying is we need big, bold leaders to step up and implement that. So looking on that edge, the last question I would like to ask you is from Sharon Griffith at Accenture. And she's saying, what do you suspect will be a disruptor to the Canadian economy that is not currently on the radar of most businesses or governments? What gives us our Goliath advantage?
Sorry, the question is, what disruption is coming?
Yeah, what is not on the radar yet?
Well, look, I don't pretend to be a futurist, so I don't know, but I know enough to know that what's already happening is just getting started. We have a lot of disruption ahead of us, both with technology, as I've mentioned, but I think it's an opportunity. The Canadians are really good at being incubators. If you look at the supercluster program, I would argue to you it's one of those understated things with like a $900 million investment. But what I hear from those superclusters, particularly from my members that are very involved in it, is we're doing some really, really neat things there, and that we should be able to scale. So that brings me back to the scale problem. Right? So much of what I said to you today is about attitude. It's about attitude and culture and a sense of urgency. I'm going to maybe share this one last story with you, because yesterday I drove by 24 Sussex on my way to an ambassador's home for dinner. And there was a parallel to me when I saw 24 Sussex and the speech that I gave today. We witnessed, the House of the People of Canada that plays host to the rest of the world. We allowed for its deterioration, brick by brick, all because someone was going to run a story in the media that, oh my God, they're taking the carpet off the wall, because, ladies and gentlemen, there's carpet on the wall. It's the 1970s in Sussex. And look at what we did to that. And it hit me at that moment. Are we doing that to Canada? Are we doing that to Canada by playing small ball, satisfying ourselves with the joy of seeing somebody ripped apart in the newspaper, or on television? Are we doing that by making ourselves feel good? Because so many other places don't have a house for their prime minister, apparently. I'm pretty sure they all do. But what is it about us that allows us to witness a decline and decay of the very institutions we cherish as democracies? And I thought, wow, are we doing that to Canada at the same time? Because if I leave you with any message, it's this. It's a call to action. We're not going to be able to do this alone. I sure as heck ain't going to do this alone. I said to all my members, you got to get out there, and they're all out there, and they're all saying what they're saying. But the people speaking to the things that I'm speaking about today in the interests of our children and our grandchildren, I promise you, the political people will follow. They will be there. So let's make sure that happens, because our country's at stake.
Thank you very much, Goldy, and I look forward to having a better future for Canadians thanks to your hard work and all the hard work that your team has done, and all the leaders collectively across the country, the business leaders. We have an opportunity to step up. We have a future in front of us, and it's actually, I don't agree with you. I don't think the glass is half empty. I think we can all hope that it's not only half full, but we have an opportunity to present a full glass to the world based on what you're saying and projecting.
Well, thank you for having me, everyone. I appreciate it.